average car has about 30,000 parts, and sometimes a problem with just one of them can turn into a disaster. In the case of a Chevy Cobalt, it's a 90-cent ignition switch.
Well, how does GM balance cost and safety?
We don't.
GM is struggling with one of the most serious safety problems in its history.
If we know there is a defect on our vehicles, we do not look at the cost associated with it. We look at the speed in which we can fix the issue.
A recall involving 2.6 million cars, all because a 2-inch ignition switch, a tiny spring and plunger, didn't work right.
Hello, and welcome to Ethics versus General Motors. Today we will show you an example of an unethical business practice that resulted in damaged property, injury, and loss of life. General Motors' faulty ignition switches resulted in 169 deaths, 275 injuries, and 17 victims of extreme injuries such as quadriplegia, paraplegia, double amputation, and brain damage. On top of all this unnecessary and avoidable death, GM has paid nearly $2.4 billion in fines, penalties, and settlements. The worst part is, all of this could easily have been avoided. In 2001, during a pre-production test, GM engineers experienced problems with ignition switches in the Saturn Ion, and an internal report was written stating the problem had been solved. During the next 2 years, a GM engineer and a service technician both reported abrupt loss of power in 2 separate models when the key was bumped. After receiving multiple reports in 2005 of Chevrolet Cobalt keys being moved out of the run position, engineers proposed the model be redesigned. However, as stated in GM documents, the fix would have been too costly. In the following year, a GM engineer signs off on changes to the ignition design and a new part goes into production. But the part number was never changed, so the automakers don't know, are not aware of the change. In 2007, GM was aware of 10 deadly crashes in which airbags didn't deploy as a result of the ignition switch falling out of the run position. However, no action was taken. If not for Lance Cooper, a small lawyer out of Marietta, Georgia, filing a wrongful death suit in 2011 on behalf of Brooke Middleton, a 29-year-old pediatric nurse, who knows how many more would have perished so tragically. In the years since, GM has recalled over 2.6 million vehicles, although GM is only liable for claims post-2009. For when America bailed out GM, when they filed for bankruptcy, when America bailed them out, they were given a liability shield that protects them from lawsuits pre-2009. So remember, unethical business does not necessarily mean illegal.
The definition of unethical is lacking moral principles, unwilling to adhere to proper rules of conduct. The case of GM ignition switch lawsuit has unethical written all over it. I would like to point out that it started way before the case ever went to trial. Many important people working for GM had known about the bad ignition switch and kept it a secret. The CEO had claimed not to know anything about it, but how can all the employees know about it and the only person who is running the company not? The whole situation looks dirty. If GM would have fixed the problem with the switch when they first found out there was a problem, it would have only cost $1 per car to fix. Instead, they pretended there was no problem and continued to make and sell their product with faulty equipment. Now they are being sued for billions of dollars and have caused hundreds of injuries and over 80 deaths. Not only is GM's conduct unethical, but in my eyes, GM is a murderer who is not taking responsibility or accountability for their mistakes. Everything about GM was bad business and is part of the reason they went bankrupt. In 2009, a bankruptcy court allowed GM to emerge from the bankruptcy protection free from liability of the old company. Plaintiffs argued that GM misled the court because it failed to disclose the problem with ignition switches. In April 2015, a federal bankruptcy judge ruled that General Motors, GM, is shielded from death and injury claims potentially totaling billions of dollars tied to defective ignition switches in certain GM small cars. GM made unethical decisions, and those decisions hurt many people. Instead of making the ethical choice and pay the people they caused harm to, GM is hiding behind the company's bankruptcy. They do not want to own their mistakes and rather continue to hurt their loyal customers. GM claims that since 2009 they are a new company and should not pay for anything that happened pre-bankruptcy. The ugly truth is the judge agrees, and now hundreds of victims and their families will go to bed tonight forever deprived of justice, while GM is bathing in billions, may now turn its back on the dead and injured worry-free. I ask you to put yourself in the shoes of another. Spending your hard-earned money on a car. You are driving down the road and the car shuts off on you. How scary would that be? Your steering wheel locks up and you are driving at high speeds, so of course you crash. The airbags don't deploy, and because of this you are severely injured. You are in the hospital and can't work. You can't pay your bills and you lose your house. You are now in debt for the first time in your life, all because you purchased the wrong car. You hire a lawyer to get compensation for what happened to you. You are just hoping to get enough to help you get back on your feet. Then you find out the dealership will not be paying you. Not only did they know about the faulty switch in your car that caused your car to turn off on you while you were driving, but they did nothing to fix it, and they will do nothing now to help you. They are hiding behind their bankruptcy and saying they are now a new company. The company will continue to make billions without a thought of you and your life, and now your life is turned upside down.
As we have learned thus far, General Motors' neglect to solve a known ignition issue in 2.6 million vehicles has resulted in numerous deaths, injuries, and eventual lawsuits. In 2015, General Motors CEO Mary Barra stated, "I have said many times, I wish I could turn back the clock. If we could, we would, but the only thing we can do is make sure we respond in the right way, and we have done so in this case and will continue to do so in everything." The statement made by Barra is beyond confusing to the victims of General Motors, since the company failed to respond to ignition issues in a timely manner, resulting in over 100 deaths and 275 injuries. So why didn't General Motors resolve the issue when it was first discovered back in 2001? Because it was too costly. General Motors' mistake in this situation was not informing the public of a known issue. Several General Motors employees have admitted to knowing about the problem, and knowing the issue may result in the death of occupants of the vehicles. If General Motors would have resolved the issue back in 2001, it would have cost a total of $2.1 million. General Motors has since paid out over $9 million to the United States government as a settlement for the company's failure to release information to the public. The company could have saved over $6.9 million and 120 lives by recalling the vehicles when the problem was realized. Our advice to General Motors would be not to conceal information, especially in instances of public safety. As a result of the company's competency in handling the situation, they would maintain the quality of their brand as well as save millions in company assets. It would have been beneficial for General Motors to spend a little in 2001 to save a large portion of money in 2014 and forward.
So there's many companies that have decided to make unethical decisions over the years. First off, GM. They knew about the key ignition problem since 2001. And the reasoning they didn't decide to do anything about it was because they said it cost too much. But because they continued not to do anything, in 2005 there was public backlash. And then finally, in April 2014, when the CEO finally testified that she didn't know anything until December 2013, that's when they actually decided to do anything about it. And then we have Google, which is a great company. We all love Google and use it every day. But what we didn't know is that over in China, Google allows the Chinese government to control what the people see when they actually use the search engine. And first off, it's immoral and unethical to restrict anyone from finding what they need to know online. And second off, Google is a company that's based in America, so as Americans we should have a say in how we do business out of the country. And then we have Enron, the big scandal that took place many years ago, where the company stole and embezzled money and were allowed agency over the earning reports and made it seem like they were a much more profitable company than they were, which in turn more people invested money, and when there was no money to be made. So this didn't only affect the lives of the investors, but also the lives of the employees, which in the end we all know ended poorly. And finally, now this isn't a company that wasn't unethical. This is actually a program, which is the Pittsburgh Business Ethic Awards, which awards companies that actually made ethical decisions because they understand that morally, and if you make the right decisions, that in the long run you'll win out in the end, and that if you are making unethical decisions, well, you can pretty much see the end of your company right around the corner.
In conclusion, General Motors made unethical decisions when the company chose to conceal information pertaining to their vehicles, resulting in deaths and injuries. Companies, as described previously, such as Google and Enron, have shared in the unethical practice of concealing information from the public. If these companies, including GM, would have taken our advice to share information, the scenarios would appear much different. The companies would have saved millions and maintained the trust of the public. Unfortunately, unethical decision-making has tarnished their good names. We hope you have learned the ethical reasoning behind the value of sharing information, especially in the instances of public safety. If you are interested in further information on the General Motors ignition switch recall, we advise you to visit the GM website, where you can find up-to-date information and the make and model of all affected vehicles. Thank you.